I still remember the smell, sharp, raw gasoline mixed with a thick rot of mud and rusting steel. It was everywhere. It lived in our clothes, our skin, our lungs. By the winter of '44, that smell had become the perfume of my youth. I was 22, old enough to know how fragile a man is, but still dumb enough to think I could fix anything with a wrench, prayer. The guys called me Grease Monkey. It stuck, partly because I could get a tank running faster than most men could light a cigarette, and partly because they needed something to laugh about. In that world, names were lighter than death, and laughter was a weapon. Sergeant O'Donnell was the loudest laugh, the 3rd Armored Division. Big man, Irish jaw, eyes that looked like they'd seen God flinch. He used to tease me every morning. "Hey, monkey, you gonna make this beast fly today?" I'd tell him maybe I would, if he didn't shoot holes in it first. That was our rhythm. His sarcasm, my stubborn. It kept us sane when the world had gone feral. Fuel was gold back then. The supply lines were stretched. The cold froze everything but the fear. And our tanks, the brass, said to ration. I said, screw that. I started experimenting, mixing aviation gas we'd scavenged from a downed P-47 with diesel, a bit of kerosene, sometimes even drops of alcohol if I could find it. My sergeant caught me one night with a jerrycan and a funnel. He laughed so hard I thought he'd choke. "Christ, kid, you trying to blow us all to Berlin in one go?" I told him I wasn't trying to blow us anywhere, just trying to make the damn engines run smoother in the cold. He called me crazy, but he let me try. When that tank started up, smooth, low, like a purring monster instead of the coughing beast it used to be, O'Donnell stopped laughing. He climbed in, revved the engine once, twice, then looked at me with something between disbelief and pride. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "You just made her sing." That night, I didn't sleep, not because of artillery fear, but because I couldn't stop thinking. Maybe I'd found something. Maybe we could move faster, save fuel, save lives. I took notes on scraps of rations boxes, writing down the ratios I'd used, the weather, the performance. It wasn't science. It was survival. Every spark mattered. The next morning, O'Donnell told the other crews. Most of them laughed too until they saw our tank cover twice the distance with less fuel. Then the laughter stopped. That's how it worked out there. Mockery first, curiosity second, respect last. We were crawling east through Belgium, rolling through ghost towns where the houses leaned like tired men. Snow mixed with ash. I remember seeing a little girl watching us from a doorway, her face white with dust, holding a doll that was missing both arms. She didn't wave. None of them did anymore. They just stared, hollow-eyed, waiting to see who would die first, us or them. Every mile forward was a bet against death. The ground was soaked in more blood than rain. The air hummed with distant gunfire. I learned to love the sound of engines more than the sound of voices. Engines meant movement, and movement meant life. O'Donnell used to say, "If we make it to Berlin, kid, it'll be because of your voodoo fuel and my bad jokes." I wanted to believe him. I really did. We slept in the cold, ate beans from cans, and pretended that home still existed. Sometimes, when the moon was bright enough, I'd write letters I never sent, to my mother, to a girl I used to know in Illinois, to myself. I'd tell them that I was doing something important, that I was helping win the war in my own small way. Truth was, I was terrified every day. But fear didn't stop the hands. You just learned to work through it, like breathing. The first time our engine carried us through a shell barrage without stalling, O'Donnell looked at me like I pulled off a magic trick. He slapped my shoulder, grinning. "You keep that up, and maybe we'll live long enough to laugh about it." I didn't laugh. I just looked at the tank, its armor still warm from the fight, and thought about how strange it was. This machine built for death had become the only thing keeping me alive. That night, as we refueled under a pale moon, O'Donnell said quietly, You might have just saved more men than you'll ever know." Then he handed me his flask. The whiskey burned going down. It felt like a baptism, a ritual between two men who'd seen too much. When I close my eyes, I can still see the tank gleaming like a beast in the cold, smoke rising in the barrel, the sound of distant thunder of a realist. And I remember thinking that maybe, just maybe, this stupid little mixture would get us home. If you're hearing this now, tell me where you're watching. I want to know how far these old stories still travel. By February of '45, Europe was nothing but wreckage stitched together by cold wind and human noise. You could drive for miles and never see a living soul. Just the bones of cities, black teeth of chimneys, and the ghosts that used to be family. We were pushing east, crawling across Belgium toward the German border, engines growling like old dogs, too stubborn to die. Every time I started my tank, I whispered a thank you to whatever gods listened to men who smelled like oil and gunpowder. The road wasn't a road anymore. It was mud mixed with glass, half-frozen bodies, and burned-out trucks. The maps didn't mean much. The landmark gone. O'Donnell sat in the turret, chewing on a piece of gum that had lost its flavor days ago. He had that same crooked grin, but his eyes were hollowing out, the kind of look men get when they've seen too many faces disappear overnight. He used to joke that my fuel mix was the reason we were still moving. "Pour some of that witch potion in, monkey," he'd yell. "Let's outrun hell one more time." And I would, hands numb, funnel shaking in the cold. I didn't tell him that I'd started mixing the fuel blind now. No ratios, no notes, just instinct. I could tell by the smell if it would work. Fear had sharpened my senses into something almost inhuman. Sometimes we'd find German fuel dumps, half destroyed, and I'd scavenge what I could. Cans of diesel, barrels of aviation gas, even oil from burned vehicles. Once, I siphoned fuel from an enemy tank that still had smoke rising from its turret. The body of its driver was slumped over the hatch, frozen stiff. I remember apologizing as I worked, whispering sorry like a prayer. War teaches you that mercy and madness often wear the same face. We moved through villages that looked like the war had bitten them clean in half. Roofs collapsed, churches gutted, fields littered with helmets and children's toys. I saw a horse once, still hitched to a wagon, its ribs showing through its hide, staring at me with glassy eyes that no longer saw anything. The sound of our engines scared birds from the trees, the only thing still brave enough to move freely in that landscape. One evening, we set up camp near what used to be a town square. The fountain in the middle had been cracked by shrapnel, and inside it were 3 helmets and a boot. No one spoke. The men just sat by the tanks, cleaning rifles and pretending to eat. The cold gnawed at our fingers. Silence felt like a punishment. O'Donnell tried to lighten the mood. He pulled out a harmonica and played something that sounded like home, maybe Irish, maybe just sad. For a moment, a few of the guys even hummed along. Then a distant explosion reminded us where we were. He stopped playing mid-note, tucked the harmonica away, and said, "Guess the bastards didn't like my music." The next morning, command told us we'd be crossing the Rhine within days. Everyone's stomach turned at that news. The river was more than water. It was the last big gate before Berlin. We knew the Germans would defend it like the entrance to hell itself. I spent that night rechecking the fuel lines, filters, everything. I couldn't sleep anyway. O'Donnell sat beside me, watching me work, smoke curling from his cigarette. "You ever scared, monkey?" he asked quietly. I didn't look. "Every damn day." He nodded. "Good. Means you're still alive." We crossed the Rhine under fire. Shells fell into the water like thunderbolts, sending plumes of black spray into the air. The bridge ahead of us was half destroyed, and trucks burned on both sides. The tanks moved single file, tracks clanking on steel that groaned beneath our weight. I swear I felt the bridge shaking under us, begging to collapse. Halfway across, an explosion rocked the left flank. Flames shot up, and for a second I thought we were done. But our tank held steady. The engine screamed but didn't die, not once. O'Donnell laughed through the smoke. "You did it again, kid. The devil himself couldn't stall this beast." When we finally reached the other side, I could barely breathe. The air stank of burnt oil and river mud. We were soaked, filthy, and alive. That was enough. The men cheered when we regrouped, but I stayed back, checking the fuel mix again. I couldn't trust anything anymore, not even my own luck. I poured a little of the blend into my palm, smelled it, and felt that strange surge of pride again. It wasn't about fuel. It was about survival, finding control in a world that had none left to give. O'Donnell came over, crouched beside me, and said, "One day, monkey, they'll teach this in school. The fuel that beat the kraut." I snorted. "Yeah, right. Nobody's gonna care how we got there. They'll just remember we made it." He smiled. "Then we make damn sure we do." That night, as I sat by the tank and watched the firelight flicker across its armor, I realized I'd forgotten peace even looked like. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, steady, alive, dependable. It was the closest thing to a heartbeat I trusted anymore. If you're still with me, make sure you subscribe. There's more to this road than just smoke and steel. The forest burned red that morning, the kind of red that eats the world alive. We had pushed deep into Germany by late March, past towns that didn't have names anymore, just coordinates and body counts. The Harz Mountain loomed like a black wall in front of us, heavy with mist, fire, and the sound of metal dying. It was beautiful, a cruel, godless way, snow falling over flames, smoke curling through the pines, the earth itself cracking open. O'Donnell said the map was useless. "Hell's the only landmark left," he growled, eyes narrowed behind soot. Our orders were to punch through the forest and clear a path for the infantry. That sounded simple on paper. In reality, it was like driving straight into the throat of chaos. Every tree hid a gun. Every silence hid a scream. I'd been awake for 36 hours, running on coffee, adrenaline, and the strange faith that my fuel mix would keep the tank alive when everything else failed. The men joked that the tank ran on fear, not fuel. They weren't far off. I could feel it in my veins, too, that twitching rhythm of tension that must stop. We rolled into the woods at dawn. The fog was thick enough to taste. The tank's engine rumbled low, steady, the only sound that kept me sane. I watched the gauges, listened for the smallest cough or rattle, ready to jump at any sign of trouble. The ground was slick with half-melted snow and frozen blood. The tracks crushed helmets, bones, and branches alike. Everything made the same sound under 30 tons of armor. Then the first shell hit. It landed 50 yards ahead, turning trees into shrapnel. Splinters flew through the air like knives. Someone screamed over the radio. Then static. O'Donnell yelled, "Guns front!" and the turret swung, cutting through smoke. I ducked low, gripping the side panel, feeling every vibration in my teeth. The cannon roared. The sound didn't end. It just blended with the echo of more guns firing in every direction. The Germans were dug in. Panzerfaust, machine guns, mortars. They knew this terrain better than we did, and they fought like men who had already accepted death. I caught glimpses through the periscope, flashes of gray uniforms darting between the trees, muzzle flares lighting up faces twisted with fury. We pushed forward anyway. O'Donnell was shouting commands I could barely hear. "Load! Fire! Move! Now!" My hands worked on instinct, adjusting fuel flow, keeping the RPM steady, fighting to keep the engine from choking on its own smoke. One bad mix, one wrong pull, and the tank would become a coffin. A shell hit the ground close enough to lift us an inch off the earth. My head slammed against the metal wall. Stars exploded behind my eyes. The smell of burned oil filled the cabin. Someone yelled that the track was hit, but when I checked, it was intact, scarred, but holding. My mix had thickened the fuel's burn rate, gave the engine more torque, more life. I didn't have time to celebrate. Another explosion, rocked the forest. When we reached a clearing, I saw what war really looked like. Not heroism, not glory, just mud, fire, and the slow mechanical movement of men dying. A half-track lay on its side, wheels spinning in the air like a dying insect. A man without legs was crawling toward it, calling for someone named Frank. I wanted to help him, but we couldn't stop. Stopping was suicide. The tank beside us took a direct hit. The blast tore its turret clean off. I saw it fly through the air like a coin flipped by God himself. The noise that followed, I still hear it when I sleep. A mix of fire, screams, and the sound of something enormous collapsing into itself. "Keep moving!" O'Donnell yelled. "Don't stop for anything!" I didn't look back. I couldn't. The air inside the tank was boiling, sweat mixed with grease, turning my face into a mask of soot. My hands were black, shaking, raw, taste blood, maybe from biting my lip, maybe not. Every nerve screamed, but I kept going. The gauges were steady. The mix was working. Stupid, desperate blend of stolen fuels and luck was carrying us through the mouth of hell. Hours passed, or maybe seconds, like hours. Time didn't exist there. It was all noise and flame. By evening, the gunfire thinned out. The forest was gone, just black stumps. The snow had melted, mud red and brown. We'd made it through, but our company hadn't. Bodies lay where trees stand. The radio crackled with silence. We stopped at the edge of a burned ridge. The tank hissed, it cooled, metal groaning like a wounded animal. O'Donnell climbed out first, helmet off, hair plastered with sweat. He looked around. "Smell that, kid? Smoke and..." He nodded. "Means we're still breathing." We found a few survivors from the other tanks, men walking ghosts. No talking, no laughing. Just hollow stares and a kind of exhaustion that doesn't sleep. I sat by the tracks, wiping oil off my hands that would never come clean. That night, the forest glowed orange in the distance, fires eating the dead, snow falling over the flames like a funeral veil. O'Donnell sat next to me, passed his flask, and said, "You ever think about what happens if your mix runs out?" I stared at the flames and said, "Then we stop. And if we stop, we die." Guess we better keep moving then. The stars above were faint, almost ashamed to look down. I remember the sound of the tank settling, the slow tick of cooling metal. It was the heartbeat of a machine that shouldn't have survived, but did. And in that rhythm, I realized something that scared me more than death. I was starting to love it. The tank, the noise, the constant motion. It was home now. When morning came, we rolled on again, deeper into Germany. There was no turning back, no time to grieve. The trees behind us were gone, burned to ash. Ahead lay Berlin, a final breath of a dying world. If you made it this far, you're part of the story now. Stay close. The fire's not done yet. By the time we reached the outskirts of Berlin, sky was color of iron and ash. It felt like the world had stopped spinning. Everything still, everything dead, except for the sound of our engines crawling toward the city that had started it all. Berlin wasn't a place anymore. It was a wound. Buildings stood like broken ribs. The air tasted like dust and burned paint, and the ground was slick with rain and blood that wouldn't dry. The closer we got, the quieter the men became. Even O'Donnell, whose voice had carried us through every firefight and frozen night, barely spoke. We rolled past miles of wreckage, trucks, tanks, bodies, horses, all melted together by fire. The Germans had turned their capital into a fortress, but even fortresses bleed. Every block was a fight. Every window held the threat of a rifle barrel. Artillery echoed from every direction, the city trembling under its own collapse. I'd never seen anything like it. It didn't feel like a city. It felt like Judgment Day. The streets were so narrow and littered with rubble that sometimes we had to plow straight through the debris, crushing walls that once held families. I kept my eyes on the gauges, my hands steady on the valves. The engine roared, strong, smooth, alive. My mix was holding. Against all reason, against every law of machinery, It was still pushing 30 tons of steel through hell. O'Donnell was in the turret, shouting coordinates between bursts of gunfire. "Left corner! Window! Fire!" The gunner obeyed, and another building collapsed into a cloud. I could hear the screams. Not soldiers, not all of them. Civilians, maybe children. You learn not to listen, but sometimes their voices sneak through the cracks in your armor and never leave. At one point, a German soldier ran out from behind a wrecked car, no older than 16. He was holding a Panzerfaust, hands shaking. He fired too early. The rocket struck the wall beside us and exploded in a burst of flame. The blast threw him backward, limp. O'Donnell cursed, then spat. "Kid should have been in school," he muttered. None of us replied. We fought like that for days, inch by inch, building by building. The city smelled like gasoline and rotting meat. Fires burned nonstop, black smoke curling into a sky that hadn't been blue in weeks. I barely slept, barely ate. I lived inside that tank, breathing its fumes, feeling its heartbeat. Every time it rumbled, I felt. Every time it went quiet, I felt naked. One morning, command ordered us toward the Reichstag. A heart to beast. We followed the wide boulevard that used to be grand. Statues shattered, trees ripped apart by shells, snipers picked off stragglers from rooftops, and machine gun fire rattled from the shadows. I could see the black dome of the Reichstag rising ahead, its flag torn, smoke pouring from its windows. When we stopped to refuel, O'Donnell climbed down and sat next to me, back against the tank, helmet on. His hair was gray with ash, his face streaked with oil and sweat. "You ever think we'd see it, monkey?" he asked. I looked at the city and said, "Not like this." He laughed, a tired, hollow sound. "Nothing ever ends the way you think it will." Then he went quiet for a while. Finally, he said, "You know, I used to believe in luck. Now I think we just ran out slower than most." I didn't answer. I was too busy listening to the tank cooling, that steady metallic tick that meant life. When the order came, we moved forward again. Artillery fire lit the horizon like lightning. Tanks, infantry advanced together, the ground trembling under the weight of history collapsing. The Reichstag loomed closer, its walls covered in soot and bullet scars. O'Donnell barked orders through the radio, voice hoarse but steady. "Move up! Keep us straight! Watch the flanks!" It happened. A shell from somewhere in the ruins hit the street ahead. The blast threw debris into the air. One chunk of masonry slammed into the turret, denting it deep. O'Donnell ducked, shouting curses. I heard the engine stutter for the first time in days. Heart stopped. I slapped the controls, checked the lines. One valve cracked, fuel leaking fast. Smoke filled the cabin. I remember thinking, not here, not now. I reached for my emergency can, poured what was left of the mix straight into the intake, ignoring the heat searing my gloves. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared back to life, louder than ever, angry, defiant. O'Donnell screamed, "That's it, monkey! Don't let her die." We pushed forward through the smoke, firing blindly, the tank shaking with every impact. The closer we got to the Reichstag, the more the city screamed, not just from guns, but from the sound of something ancient breaking. Then it was over, just like that. We reached the square. The gunfire slowed, then stopped. Flag was down. The radio crackled. Berlin had fallen for a long time. None of us moved. The air was thick with silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. O'Donnell climbed out, stood on the turret, and looked at the ruins of the city. He didn't say a word. He just stared, shoulders heavy, face pale in the dawn. I joined him. The wind carried the smell of burning wood and victory, and it was the same smell as death. I realized then that winning a war doesn't feel like winning it. It feels like surviving a fire that never goes out. O'Donnell finally spoke, voice low. "We made it, kid. Berlin, can you believe it?" I didn't answer. My throat was tight. I looked at the city, the smoke, at the people crawling from cellars like shadows. I felt not pride, not joy, just the weight of every mile we'd driven, every man we'd buried. The tank engine ticked behind us, still alive, still burning that mix that everyone had once laughed at. Somehow, it made sense. It was the only thing that still worked the way it was supposed. The war ended, but no one told my. They kept shaking for weeks after the guns went silent. I could still feel the vibration of the engine in my bones, still hear the rumble that had become the rhythm of my heart. When they said Berlin had fallen, when the radio crackled with those words, everyone cheered. Men hugged, cried, fired their rifles into the air. I didn't. I just stood by the tank, staring at the horizon, where smoke still rose. The sky looked the same as it always had, gray, dirty, heavy. Victory didn't have a color. We stayed in the ruins for days. The fighting had stopped, but the dying hadn't. Snipers still picked off patrols, mines still hid under the rubble, diseases crawled through the streets faster than bullets ever had. The civilians emerged like ghosts from their basement, pale faces, hollow eyes, hands clutching whatever scraps of food or faith they had left. I remember a woman who approached our tank with a child in her. She didn't say a word. She just stared at me, then at the canister of fuel by my feet. I gave her my canteen. She nodded once, turned, and disappeared into the ruin. I never saw her again. O'Donnell said we'd done our job, that it was time to rest. I spent hours sitting on the tank, cleaning tools that didn't need cleaning, checking lines that were already fine. I didn't know how to stop moving. The tank wasn't just a machine anymore. It was my heartbeat, my home, my punishment. Every time the engine cooled, empty. One night, the sergeant sat beside me on the turret, his boots dangling over the side, cigarette glowing between his fingers. He looked at the city, the fires still burning, the shadows crawling through streets that used to be grand, and said quietly, "You know what's funny, kid? We won." I didn't say anything. He laughed softly. "Doesn't feel like it, does it?" I shook my head. "Feels like we just stopped losing." He stared at the ground for a long time. "Yeah, that's about right." For a while, we just sat there, listening to the night. In the distance, you could hear the sound of a piano, someone playing in a half-destroyed building. The notes drifted through the air, soft and broken, like a memory trying to survive the fire. O'Donnell closed his eyes. "Haven't heard that sound in a long time," he said. The next day, command sent new orders. We were to hold the sector, keep patrols running, maintain order. Order. That word didn't mean much. The city was chaos, wrapped soldiers in silence, without purpose, civilians without homes, and all of us pretending that the end of war meant the beginning of peace. I fixed everything I could. Trucks, jeeps, generators, anything that needed a spark. The officers started calling me the man with the magic mix. I didn't tell them the truth, that I'd lost the exact formula weeks ago, that now I just poured and hoped. They thought I was a genius. I felt like a fraud. One afternoon, a colonel came to inspect our unit. He shook my hand, said he'd heard of me. "Sergeant O'Donnell speaks highly of you," he said. "Says you kept his men alive." I didn't know how to answer. "What do you say to that?" "You're welcome." I was just scared. I didn't want to die. None of those fit, so I just nodded. He told me they were recommending me for a commendation. When he left, O'Donnell laughed. "Look at you, monkey. You make gas explode the right way, and now you're a hero." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. A week later, O'Donnell was gone. They reassigned him to another unit heading west for demobilization. He left me a note tucked under my wrench. "Don't forget the smell of the road." That was all. No goodbye, no promise, just that. After that, the nights got longer. I started hearing things. Phantom engines, distant shells that weren't there. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, thinking the tank was moving, but it wasn't. The silence felt wrong. I'd sit on the ground beside it, running my hands along the cold metal, whispering to it like an old friend. The city slowly came back in pieces. Kids played in streets where men had died. Shops reopened in basements. Flags changed, but the air didn't. I watched it all like a man half awake. The fuel barrels were running low, and for the first time since Belgium, I didn't care. I wanted the tank to rest. I wanted myself to rest. One evening, a German mechanic, an old man with trembling hands, came to our camp. He'd worked in factories during the war. He saw me tinkering and asked to watch. We didn't speak the same language, but we didn't need to. Mechanics don't talk. They listen to engine, to the rhythm of tool, to silence. He pointed to the tank's side, then to his heart, and nodded. I think he understood me better than anyone left alive. When we were finally told we'd be going home, I didn't cheer. Some men cried with joy, others sang. I packed my things quietly, looked at the tank one last time, and rested my hand on the armor. "You did good," I said, "better than we deserved." As we drove away from Berlin, I looked back through the window of the truck. The fires had gone out, but smoke still hung in the air, twisting upward like the breath of the dead. I realized then that war never really ends. It just changes its uniform. The ship that carried me home didn't feel real. It was too quiet, too clean. The metal floor shined, the beds had sheets, and the food didn't come from a can. After months of eating in the mud, it felt wrong to hold a fork that wasn't covered in rust. We were hundreds of men on that ship, all dressed in the same uniform, all pretending we were heading somewhere new, but our eyes told a different. We were ghosts of a floating graveyard, headed west, chasing a place that might not exist anymore. The ocean stretched forever, flat and gray. Every night I'd stand on deck, letting the wind slap my face until it stung. The salt air mixed with the smell of diesel from the ship's engines, and for a moment it almost felt like home. That same hum, that same vibration under my Sometimes I'd close my eyes and imagine I was still in the tank. O'Donnell yelling orders, shells flying, the world burning but alive. It's strange what you miss. Not safety, not peace, just the noise. The noise made sense. Silence never did. I didn't talk much on the trip. Some guys played cards, some sang, some tried to laugh their way out of what we'd seen. But laughter didn't reach very far out there. At night, the bunks creaked with nightmares. You'd hear men mumbling in their sleep. Names, screams, orders. A few cried quietly. Nobody said anything. You don't wake a man from those kinds of dreams. The day we saw New York, the deck erupted. Cheers, whistles. I wanted to feel that joy in the air, but it didn't come. The skyline rose through the fog, tall and perfect, untouched by war. It felt like another planet. The Statue of Liberty looked smaller than I remembered from postcards. Maybe because it was bigger now, or maybe because she looked fragile, like one good shell could crack her open. When we docked, the crowd was massive. Bands played, flags waved, women cried and kissed strangers. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes popped like gunfire. "How does it feel to be home?" someone yelled at me. I wanted to say, "It doesn't." Instead, I just nodded and kept walking. My parents were waiting at the station in Illinois. My mother's hair had turned white since I left. My father stood tall, trying to hide the tremor in his hand. My mother hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. I didn't have the heart to tell her that I hadn't really come back. Not the part she remembered. Home was smaller than I remembered. The streets, the houses, the people, all quieter, slower. The world had kept turning while we were gone, but we came back stuck in 1944 in mud and smoke. The neighbors brought food. Everyone wanted to shake my hand, hear a story. "Did you see Berlin? Did you meet Eisenhower? Was it true what they say about the Germans?" I smiled, said polite things, told half-truths. I didn't tell them about the forest, or the boy with the Panzerfaust, or the woman with the child who didn't speak. They wouldn't have understood. War stories don't belong in living rooms with lace curtains and coffee cake. I tried working again. A garage downtown offered me a job. First day, I picked up a wrench, smelled the oil, and froze. The sound of an engine backfiring outside made me drop the tool. My heart started racing. The owner, an old man with kind eyes, told me to take the day off. I never went back. The shop smell was too close, too much like the tank, too much like the war. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake listening for sounds that weren't there. The low rumble of treads, O'Donnell's voice, the click of a rifle being loaded. Once woke up on the floor sweating because I'd dreamt the engine had died and we were stranded under fire again. My mother found me sitting on the porch, staring at nothing. "You okay, honey?" she asked. I said I was fine. We both knew I wasn't. Months passed. Seasons changed. The papers talked about rebuilding Europe, about heroes coming home. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a leftover, a man built for a world that no longer existed. Then one morning, I went down to the garage behind the house, the one my father had used to fix tractors. The air smelled like gasoline, dust, and time. I stood there a long while, then picked up a wrench. My hands still knew what to do. I opened an old engine, cleaned it piece by piece, not because it needed fixing, but because I needed to remember who I was before everything broke. When the machine finally sputtered to life, I laughed, not loudly, just soft, tired laugh. It wasn't the sound of victory. It was the sound of something still working in a world that shouldn't. Sometimes I write letters to O'Donnell, even though I don't know who ended. Maybe he's home, too. Maybe he found peace. Or maybe he's sitting somewhere staring at an engine, trying to feel alive again. You don't really come back from war. You just learn how to live beside. If you made it through the noise and silence with me, drop a comment. Tell me what home means to you. I'm still figuring that out. I'm old now, old enough that my hands shake when I pour coffee, old enough that the mirror shows a stranger who carries my memories like stones. The world has changed, the wars, the music, the machines, but the smell of gasoline still takes me back faster than any photograph. One whiff, and I'm 22 again, covered in mud, metal, and terror, praying over an engine that kept us alive when God wouldn't. People call me a hero sometimes. I don't correct them, but I don't believe it either. Heroes come home with something left to give. I came home empty and had to build myself from the scraps that war didn't take. I learned how to live slowly, carefully, like handling old explosives, never making sudden moves, never letting myself remember too fast. But memory doesn't ask for permission. It just appears like smoke through crack. On quiet mornings, when the town's still asleep, I sit on the porch and listen. There's a low hum from the highway, the sound of engines in the distance. Most folks don't notice. I do. It's a comfort, a reminder that somewhere out there machines are still moving, carrying people toward something better than what we had. I like to think my little experiment, a crazy mix that made O'Donnell laugh, helped in some invisible way. Maybe some mechanic read a note or a rumor and found a way to make engines burn cleaner, fast, stronger. Maybe that was my contribution to the world. Not metal, speeches, but motion. I kept the notes, you know. The ones I scribbled on ration boxes and scraps of paper. They're brittle now. The ink faded, but the numbers are still there. Ratios, adjustments, temperature, every smudge a memory. Sometimes I run my finger over them, the same way I used to trace bullet holes on the tank's armor, reminders of where we'd been hit and didn't break. The tank itself is gone, scrapped decades ago, melted down into something ordinary, maybe part of a bridge, maybe part of a car. The idea that something I once loved could become part of something peaceful feels right. Machines don't mourn. They just change shape. I never married, never stayed anywhere too long. I worked odd jobs, mechanic, driver, even a janitor at a local airfield. The noise of engines kept me company, filled the spaces where other people put love or laughter. Isn't lonely exactly, just tuned to a different frequency. The war teaches you to live with ghosts, to let them sit beside you without flinching. Sometimes the neighborhood kids come by when I'm in the garage, curious about the old man with grease. They ask if the stories are true, if I really drove a tank through Berlin, if I really made it home without a... I tell them the truth. The tank survived because luck ran with us that day, not because of me. But they don't believe it. They want the legend, not the truth. I give them both. They listen wide-eyed, mouths open. And when I finish, one of them always asks, "Were you scared?" I tell them the same thing O'Donnell told me every damn day. They laugh, thinking it's a joke, but it's not. Fear kept us sharp. Fear kept us alive. Sometimes at night, when the wind picks up, I swear I hear that old engine again, that deep, steady rumble that never let me down. It's not haunting, it's comforting, like an old friend checking in. I close my eyes and see us again, Berlin burning, the road stretching ahead, the tank's breath steady beneath my feet, O'Donnell laughing through the smoke. We made it there and back, untouched, but not unharmed. There's a difference. The body heals. The soul just learns how to limp. Now, as I sit here with my coffee and my ghosts, I realize something simple. We didn't fight, destroy. We fought to keep moving. That's what life is. Movement. Doesn't matter if it's a tank, a car, or an old man's heart. You stop, you die, you keep moving, you live. So if you're hearing this, if you've made it through all 7 parts of this story, remember this. Don't let anyone laugh at your ideas. Don't let them tell you it's crazy, pointless. I was laughed at too. And that mix, that little spark of madness, carried us through fire and home again. If this story stayed with you, hit like, share it, and subscribe. Not for me, but for every mechanic, every soldier, every dreamer who ever kept the engine running when the world tried to stop.